Hello and welcome to this video on the Wobbler2 or Wobbler squared from This Is Not Rocket Science. Let's check out what's to come.
Tap, 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 tap.
And this video is sponsored by This Is Not Rocket Science. Now I covered Wobbler1, Wobbler as it was known back then, back when that came out, and I'll link that video in the description. All the LFO functions of the first version have remained the same, and that video is going to be your comprehensive guide to all things wibbly wobbly and LFO like. Now this video is going to come in 4 parts. A quick rundown of the LFO, we'll then look at all the drum synthesis and sample playback. Part 3 will then get into beats ahoy, playing masses of beats and exploring the interesting, dynamic and exciting beats we can build with the Wobbler. And then part 4 is going to get a little weird and a little strange, where we kind of turn it into a drum drone or the weirdest filter. Heads up, it's definitely not a filter. Throughout the video I'll have 2 Wobbler modules, but they're really both there to just show more of Wobbler at the same time. You of course don't need to explore all the things I'm going to do in the video. So although I'll guide you to my Wobbler1 video to check out all the LFO things because it hasn't changed, let's still just quickly overview them here. My main output, green trace green cables, is modulating the cutoff of my filter. This is an attenuverter for that output. This is modulating the spread, the stereo modulation of the filter cutoff. Blue trace blue cables. So with these together, this is the sound, and I could say invert this second output. You can see them working against each other there. Each mode offers different things, more standard LFOs here with frequency. You can trigger these behaviours, tempo sync them, CV this frequency. We can play with phase in this mode, phasing that second output. And wave shape on mod there. And these are smooth morphing style controls. Into the next mode, we get some extra wobbly wobbles. Wobbly wobbly. Sound like Mr. Blobby. Again with different wave shapes. We then move into these triggered modes, where we can trigger spring-like wobbles. This is the energy within that spring, from decaying to fading in. Pendulum mode here. and random voltages. That we can smooth out. And all the phase controls, the mod controls, the LFO type, and all the way we control that is under CV. So let's take Wobbler into the drum mode by hitting bang on. The first drum mode is the big drum. And this gives us kicks and tom-like sounds, with the decay, and then a pitch envelope, and the tuning there on frequency. So good for making kick drums. And now we've got a kick. Let's explore this compression on the output level knob. It compresses from no volume to the left. And then on the right, clockwise from center, we get a clean sound into a distortion. If we go just off of that big drum, we actually get a big reverse drum, where the pitch envelopes and the amplitude envelopes give us these reverse sounds. Coming into the next mode there, we have the block, again with decay and tuning. And the alter setting there changes the shape from cubes to plates on the left and to more discs and tube-like shapes on the right. And this is a good time to talk about the second output, which gives us an envelope on this blue trace here that follows the sound. You can see the envelope we're getting for this drum sound, or a ducking envelope left of center, anti-clockwise. We see that on the LEDs too, where it positively offsets to being open and then ducks. You can see that timing of that ducking changes, allowing us to sidechain and duck and modulate patches around the drum sound this is creating. The next mode here is Sproing. The alter knob changes the speed in the center from being static to going down in pitch. And you can still think of this as the decay or the length, but it's the spread between these boom, these individual hits in the Sproing. Alter right of center makes things rise in pitch. And this is a fun one to compress really hard. We move into the snare drum model here, which has the model of the rattle of the springs underneath a snare, tuning, decay, and alter changes the tonality of the drum. The next drum mode is a hi-hat, where we have the length, tuning, and high-pass filtering, and then pushing beyond the hi-hat, much like we pushed beyond the big drum to get the reverse sound, we get a digital clap. With a tuning control, and you can see it's a series of bursts to give these tight, crisp clap sounds with a kind of clock rate reduction, giving that downsampled digital edge. This lengthens the final hit and spreads those sounds. To take this into samples, we'd hold bang on and the trigger, and that lights up both the LFO type there and the drum type, and the bang on is lit, where alter now becomes our sample bank select, and this becomes a sample select within the bank. Tuning and decay controls. sample bank. Really interesting envelope outs here, following these samples from this output. And notice these controls are all morphing and crossfading. They're not hard switches between selecting samples, or even between selecting banks, which allows for a lot of creativity in how you morph between samples, and that works in the drum synthesis mode as well. It blends between its controls rather than steps. So that's a quick look at getting into these drum modes, drum synthesis and samples. Let's just go beats ahoy, enjoying lots of beats, and then we're going to look at this in a way more experimental, creative and strange way at the end of the video. So here's some more minimal techno. With the big drum, kick drum on this wobbler, and my reverby weird snare-like thing in the Sproing mode, spring and sprong, on this wobbler. So let's mute all the sounds and listen to these individually. The first bit of modulation actually comes from the gate signal itself. You can hear that cuts the sound in and out. Then adding this blue trace here, a pitch to bring this up on step 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then have a signal accenting on beat 2. It's really interactive with the probability in this gate pattern coming in to trigger it, the accent, the CV bringing the pitch up, and how that changes to that gate length. Now my Sproing, this again has different gate lengths, slightly longer gates, giving different amounts of repeats there on that springy sound. I'm adding an accent. Then I have a voltage here, this yellow trace, which I could use to say pitch this up on certain hits. I could make that so that the repeats pitch up. And I love all that kind of reverberant weird noise that it's doing. So those are the two sounds together. Let's add the other sounds back in. So here I'm using two Wobbler2s again, snare drum for this one, and block for this one. Let's start with our snare drum. Now I have some probabilities in my pattern. The main hits are beats 2 and 4. And the CVs are changing the frequency with an inverted voltage to bring it down on beats 2 and 4 and to leave that high on those in between steps. Now there's an accent on beats 2 and 4 as well. All the sounds are the same without the accent. We can hit it a bit louder and a bit longer in this particular mode. Now the block sound has an accent and again some modulation. I'm modulating the length of the sound. I'm modulating the shape of the block. And accenting the first hit in that pattern. So these two together. Adding my kick. Hi-hat. Little percussion sound. And then these envelopes modulating this bass sound. So here I'm using this hi-hat mode, and when you push that hi-hat mode all the way around, as we've seen, we get a digital clap, giving us this clap sound on the right-hand wobbler. And then we have this modulated hi-hat, which has panning modulation, and mod and alter, and an accent pattern. I'm going to speed up my hi-hat pattern here, and hopefully you can hear that accent pattern. Without it, machine gun-like static sounds, and then with the accent pattern, and then random modulation over the decay of the sounds, the high-pass filtering there on alter, and to the frequency of these harmonics. And it's a full-on hi-hat. Let's add that pan modulation back in. So that against my clap. Let's add a bit of reverb back in. Just a touch. Kick drum back in. Let's calm down these hi-hats again. And I'm using the output, this phased envelope that's been ducked by going anti-clockwise to fade in this bass sound. Now this controls modulation and VCAs. As I extend that time so it stays ducked down even longer, we get this sudden duck every time that clap hits. Here's this one. That's entirely this wobbler. And that's this one. Together. And I'm CVing the alter here to CV through and shift through these samples. Let's jam around on sequencing for a moment. Without CV, you can hear it's not really doing much that's interesting other than just triggering a sound. Add the CV back in. We can pitch up globally. Same on this one. Just triggers an accent until I actually use this alter CV pattern, which you can see here on data. And I love how that just falls apart. So here's this nice kind of swaying, wonky, stolper beats, stumbling beats, wonky hip hop. Now this hi-hat is external to these two modules. I find something straight really helps keep things on track when you've got this off-kilter, wonky kind of drunk stumbling beat going on. We'll remove that for now, and here's this left-hand wobbler. Triggers in blue there, sequencing of alter in green. And then this wobbler, I've got this kind of click rimshot like sound, and these little kind of rolls on tom samples. Leaving the reverb off and bringing this one back in. It's just got this lovely kind of drunk push and pull to it. And again, this is all because I'm sequencing alto. If I remove them, accent pattern, same accent to both here, just on quarter notes. Sequences back in. Bit of verb on this one. Straight hi-hat in the background. So here we are with the sample banks again. This one I'm just triggering effects manually. So this wobbler is where all the action is really. This one I'm just triggering a sample, using it into loads of effects. Create little transitions and effects just to play with live. Now muting that. Here's my backing, so nothing to do with this and just some samples, a kick and a hi-hat. And it really does kind of sound like the most boring thing ever. But because this is so exciting. Such a nice whip and crack to that snare. Accents, other little percussive hits. Triggers there in blue, alto modulation in green. Here's without them. I first started then using CV to sequence across. To get that more aggressive snare on 2 and 4. And then the accent, make sure that really kind of pops out. Little backing back in. And this is just sounding super tasty. And here's both wobblers backed up by kick, snare and clap from the squid. The left hand wobbler here. With sequencing again to change the hi-hat pattern, accents. This wobbler. With a little bit of pitch sequencing. Really pitching down. A cymbal sample there. Bit of delay. Bit of verb. It's just a bit of background colour and rhythm. And this wobbler has been sidechained with an envelope ducking a VCA here without it. I'm bringing my drums back in. It works okay, but again this is a duck with the kick. Just that instant vibe, that pumping in the top end. Playing around with the samples here. So here we have total funky random grooviness set against hopeful suspended chord stabs. Removing those, here's my backing beat from the squid sample. And then panned hard left, this wobbler. And panned hard right, this one. Bringing the backing beat back in. Opening up those sounds. You can really hear the full-on random nonsense. But closing down those decays. And you could sequence this with a regular looping pattern rather than full randomness, so you get this glitchy, shifting sound one that's repetitive and potentially more, quote, musical. Chord stab back in, and we'll just listen to these evolve for a moment because it's fully random, different sounds will emerge as it plays.
Tap, 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 tap.
Invite you to come and beatbox with Priscilla.
Tap, 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 tap.
So here's Wobbler2 blended on top of a saw wave oscillator, triggered by the saw wave oscillator, as you can see there on data. You can think of this as a drum drone, as Handback might call it, or maybe the weirdest filter that you'll patch with. I'll play around for a moment, and then let's get into what's going on. Now, it sounds monstrous, and this was patched on top of this saw wave, which now you're listening to in my mixer. Let's remove the pitch sequencing for now, tune this back up, and we'll use this static saw wave to trigger this, and we're monitoring the output directly. So I'm muting the saw wave in my mixer. This is the output of Wobbler. All sorts of bonkersness. So let's just back the drive off. We're in the drum synthesis mode. We'll get into some samples in a moment. And we can think of this almost like hard sync. Every time this oscillator resets, it hard syncs or rather triggers a drum sound. So if I sweep the frequency of Wobbler without sweeping the oscillator coming in to trigger it, we get an almost kind of hard sync sound that you might have heard between two more standard oscillators before. All the drum parameters will change the waveforms and the tones that we get. Let's go into the sample mode and see what we can do with samples. And remember, these are all tracking that input. If I shift the octave down, oof. Some kind of audio or cowbell thing. We can hear that snare drum. Let's crank this back up. And as these are all smooth changes rather than stepped sample changes, if we put some LFOs in, we can kind of think of it like moving through a wavetable. So let's give that a go. Let's put the raw saw wave into the mix as well. This back in. There's such a fascinating range of textures and sounds. So this is just Wobbler, and my input saw wave that's triggering it has a volt-per-octave sequence. Let's make Wobbler track the same pitch, so we get a relative wave shape to the input trigger and the actual Wobbler frequency as well. We could add an envelope to this as well, which would then start to sound like a sync sweep. So this is now a mixture of volt per octave and a decaying envelope. And this is just Wobbler. I'm just driving it with a saw wave. It sounds killer. Let's mix the actual saw wave back in my mixer. So one thing I haven't done in this video is really explore those cycle outputs, having the trigger on when a drum plays, and then the kind of inactive portion giving as a trigger out as well, could lead to some really interesting rhythmic interplay within a modular system. You can take things like that clap generation or the Sproing that gives these lovely kind of bursting envelopes on that second output, and synthesize a whole world of other percussion sounds and interesting modulations for non-percussion sounds too. Drop a hard sync in the comments if you've got this far, hit like, subscribe, check out any extras over on patreon.com/DivKid, and I'll see you next time. Bye!